All right, good morning, class. We are joined today by Associate Director of Game Management at the University of Southern California, Jordan Grays. Jordan got her start in the sports industry as an assistant event manager at Memorial Stadium in Cal Athletics. There, Jordan oversaw event staffing, was the event lead for women's lacrosse at Cal, and also assisted with any event happening at Memorial Stadium. From there, she joined the staff at the University of California, Davis, or formerly known as UC Davis. She was an events coordinator there for a couple of years. At Davis, Jordan was responsible for the development and implementation of a sound event management plan for all her assigned intercollegiate athletic events. She coordinated and supervised conference and NCAA championship events that were held on UC Davis's campus. And she also implemented and managed a volunteer program for guest services at UC Davis. Next, she made the jump over to the Power Five again by joining USC, University of Southern California. She started as an assistant director of game management and was recently promoted to associate director. In this role, she currently oversees her assigned sports from an event side, but also oversees camps and special events that are happening on campus. So let's give a warm welcome to Jordan Grays. Jordan, thanks for being here.
Hello. Thanks, Micah. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And just a little background, Jordan and I worked together at UC Davis for a couple of years. We were both hired around the same time, so she had to put up with me all the time, which was great. So I guess just to get started, how did you start your career in sports?
Yeah, so for me, I knew I've always wanted to work in sports. So it was just kind of how do I get there? Didn't know exactly what I wanted to pursue just yet, but I knew I wanted my education to be geared towards sports. So I got my undergrad degree in sport management with a minor in marketing. And then I played basketball in college. With basketball being a winter sport, it was kind of difficult to do those internship type of programs because it overlapped both semesters. So wasn't fully able to immerse myself into the industry yet. So once I graduated, I went straight into my master's and got my master's at University of San Francisco for a sport management degree as well. So with that, being in the Bay Area, was able to kind of immerse myself in those teams. So kind of did the part-time grind with the Warriors, the Oakland A's, and also the Raiders at the time. So I was able to kind of get into event management, working those part-time roles, understanding all aspects of different professional events. And then as well got into a really great internship at Cal, working at the Cal Memorial Stadium in stadium operations and working with football. So yeah, that was my start. Knew I wanted to work into sports, kind of just took every little opportunity that I could, which led me into event management.
Nice. And so why did you think event management was the spot for you?
Yeah, so I enjoy the organization, coordination, logistics aspect of events. There's so many details that go into it, and it can, go from a fire safety, police safety management aspect, all the way to a ticketing, aspect of it all and everything in between. A lot of the event specific, especially when you're working in sports, knowing the nuances of that sport and the rules and regulations of that sport, getting the field prepped and stuff like that. So it's a wide range of things that you're kind of organizing and putting together and to be a cohesive event, and being that glue person to make all of that work together. So student athletes can perform at the highest level, was just something that really attracted me to be in events, specifically in college athletics. But yeah, doing the behind the scenes stuff that, you don't see. And we kind of say if people don't know what's going on, that, we're doing our job well. So being able to do that and execute that, is kind of the why.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how no one realizes what we do until something goes wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. So when nothing goes wrong and people don't know exactly what we're doing, what we're touching, that's how you know we're doing it right.
Yeah, like I know the NBA finals are currently going on. They had an issue with the rim.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny because that's the third time this season in a Nuggets game that they've had a rim issue.
Yeah.
And I was at the first game when that happened in Denver.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. My buddy leans over to me and says, "Isn't that what you do for a living?"
Exactly.
What I do. So you talk about you got your career started doing some internships in professional sports and then made your way to collegiate athletics. What's the difference between the two for you?
Yeah, so I always recommend when people kind of get their first start into sports is to kind of experience both realms, and then also if you want to get into a professional setting, having the experience if you're able to of different parts of professional, so working with the NBA, MLB, and working with the NFL. They're all very different. So for me, working in the professional setting was just that. It was very professional, a little bit more corporate, which isn't a bad thing. And you get to enjoy that. You enjoy the fan base and stuff like that. But the authenticity of working with student athletes and working on a college campus, and having a little bit more of just an outcome of a game, kind of attracted me more of working in college athletics, and then being a former student athlete as well, and having similar experiences that they have and wanting to provide the best experience possible because I've been in those shoes, also kind of attracted me to kind of go to that path.
Do you feel like there's a decent amount of former student athletes working in college athletics?
Yeah, I would say majority of, not all by all means, but I think majority of people who work in college athletics have been former student athletes, or have just been around student athletes for a while. I know there's some people who, especially in the student athletic academic center, like they were tutors before, so they've been working with student athletes while they were in undergrad and still had such an appreciation for that and went towards that. So I do think a lot of people that work in the industry have had some connection with college athletics and, have stayed geared towards that because of that.
Okay, awesome. What's your day-to-day like?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, I know you're super busy right now, but describe what you do on a daily basis at work.
Yeah. That's always a hard thing. I think I'm busy right now, but my busyness is always seasonal. So right now, it's summer, so it's a lot of camps and clinics and stuff that our coaches are getting prepped for. So we help support that. So very busy with that aspect. So we're constantly checking to make sure our coaches and our programs are compliant, not only with game management policies and procedures or facilities policies and procedures, but it's a huge element of the youth protection aspect of it all, and being compliant not only with our campus policies, but also through the state of California. So there was a new fingerprint law that got passed about 2 years ago, and it's still a little bit new with our coaches, and we have brand new coaches that come every year and stuff. So getting them, abreast of all the policies and procedures of that. Daily, I mean, it's hard to say like what I do on the daily. But yeah, I would say that I'm constantly the same with, even though I'm doing events, I also am assigned in a facility, which is our track and field facility. So a lot of that is daily upkeep as well, and maintenance and scheduling stuff. Luckily our building is new. It's within 2 years. So a lot of my stuff is premeditative stuff, but yeah, it's difficult to say what a day in the life, because it is different every single day.
How do you prep for working an event? Let's kind of talk about like an intercollegiate athletic event. So like which sports are you assigned to?
Yeah, so my sports this year is track and field, and men's volleyball. Previously I used to have beach volleyball and lacrosse as well at USC. But for me, prepping, I think the biggest thing is always having like a timeline plan. And knowing, okay, we're, once you have that schedule and knowing, okay, I'm 3 months out, what are the things I need to kind of prep in advance before we get closer to the season. And a lot of that is facility based. So you're working with your grounds crew, you're working with custodial and facility management, whatever projects, capital projects, things, being painted, or if things have been broken and being restored. And also checking in on your assets. So, you have a season, you use your scoreboard all season, and then it hasn't been touched for months until you're gearing up. So, it's best in that 2-month period to go and you're testing out your scoreboard, pitch clocks, radios, all of that stuff that could have been broken in those past 6 months that you haven't been over at your facility. So if something is broken, you have that time. So I think building out that timeline is critical. That includes like your staffing needs. Are you onboarding more people to get them ready to go for your event? That takes a while, depending on the school that you're at. If you're hiring or something like that. So building out a timeline, I think, is very critical, and that I would say is about give yourself that 2 months prior to your season to start that.
Okay. And then do you work anything with football? Kind of like?
Yes, so it is all hands on deck for football. My role, I run as our dispatcher for athletics. So for USC, USC owns the Coliseum, LA Coliseum. However, it's not ran and operated by athletics. So essentially we're a tenant. So we don't do the daily operations in that building and facility. So I'm up in our command center and I'm a representative for athletics. So I answer a lot of questions that the Coliseum may have of what like our production is going, timelines, officials movement, team movements, all of that stuff, like event-based stuff. I help facilitate information up there, and then also emergency response stuff as well. So I manage the radios of our game management team. So they're putting in reports of, there's a fight, to there's a spill, to a trash cleanup pickup situation, to we need CHP outside in our parking lots. And then being able to dispatch out those resources to help facilitate the event. So that is my role on game day. A little different.
Yeah. So how does that differ from when you were working football games at Cal and at UC Davis?
Yeah, so at Cal was different, and similar with UC Davis because those stadiums were ran and operated by athletics. So definitely a bigger role of putting all of those pieces together. At Cal, we would hire staff. He was one of our event managers that ran our control post, or command post. And we would essentially provide those resources so he'd be able to help facilitate that stuff. And whereas I was more boots on the ground, and so you had kind of your event and facility hat on at the same time. So now I'm more like eyes in the sky, and also a resource as well for the boots on the ground, because it's amazing when you're up there and there's so many cameras. We're sitting next to our DPS officer who controls all those cameras and stuff like that. So we're able to kind of communicate out pain points or pinpoints and stuff that's happening in the facility and forecast out for the people who are out on the ground. So a little different there, but essentially knowing the ins and outs of the event fully is needed in both roles.
And then what about UC Davis? What was your responsibility for football?
Yeah, so I think UC Davis, my role is a little bit more boots on the ground, making sure the facility was kind of good to go. We had student workers, volunteers, making sure they were all in place. So I was a little more exterior and stadium focused, rather than the event game specific. Um, but yeah, I would say that was my role at UC Davis from a football perspective.
And how does it differ when UC Davis has a stadium that seats about 10,000 on a good day,
Yeah.
whereas Cal you can see probably get what 50? No, 30?
They have, I think, a little over 60,000. It's been years since they've, I think, have kind of reached that. I think they sold out their the last big game against Stanford. They had a significant.
Yeah,
but,
I was at that game. That was a good,
okay.
good
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
still had some bleachers sections blocked off,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
everything else was pretty full, which
Yeah.
was cool.
Yeah.
I'd only been to that stadium for a lacrosse game
Okay.
where it's
Okay.
pretty empty.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. It is massive.
and I
And
guess also touch on USC, whose stadium holds the Coliseum holds what 80.
yeah. Yeah. Um, so I will say running the event itself, there's not much of a difference in the sense of, from exterior in parking, that's always a huge thing to navigate, no matter how big of size of a stadium. You're working on parking, you're working with CHP and your safety officers on how to get people in and out. So there's a lot of that type of coordination from like your ticket takers, what your security staffing is, emergency policies, all of that essentially remains the same no matter what institution you're kind of at. And what's the scale may be different, but essentially what you're doing and what the resources you have to implement for the event remains the same. For me personally, it is a little more gratifying of putting in that same amount of work and the outcome is a larger fan base and more of an impact that way than having the same amount of work and a lot of details you're still putting into a lower attended event, but that work and stuff is still needed for a safety perspective and fan experience perspective. So there's not really much of a difference. It feels like it is, where it's like it's a lower scale, not as highly attended, but a lot of those crucial organizational logistical pieces still need to be like implemented at all three facilities. I think just the only difference of being a tenant versus not a tenant is just the planning of it all and having more roles and responsibilities. So, at Cal and at Davis, we're setting up the gates, we're putting everything out. Whereas at USC, we kind of say, hey, this is how we want certain things to look. And that Coliseum team is ultimately doing that for us. They're putting in the building stuff, and then they also have their building policies and procedures that they're establishing and then letting us know so that we can, enforce them, rather than from a Cal and UC Davis, we were ultimately putting in those policies and procedures and learning from some stuff and applying those and implementing those. So I think that the tenant piece is a little bit different, but as a whole, event wise, I don't think there's much of a difference between the like three tiers, I guess you can say, from a stadium perspective.
For sure. I guess you touch on larger attendances. Do you feel like there's more pressure on you when there's more eyes at an event? And in addition to, more fans at the games, you have the Pac-12 network, you have ESPN, you have nationally televised broadcasts football obviously is in a league of their own, but
yeah,
all the other sports are televised nationally as well, or almost all of them are. What's that like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess when you say pressure, there's two parts that I kind of think of. One part is almost pressure from administration. And that pressure can be a little bit different and can be somewhat of a challenge because sometimes administration's focus is a lot different than what an event specific focus is, because our primary focus is, yes, for the event to happen, but also for the safety and well-being of your fans, officials, student athletes, everyone who is attending your event. That is like your top priority and focus. And at times, I'm sure that is like their, concern and focus as well. They want everyone to be safe. But some of the decisions they would like to happen isn't the most safest or, stuff like that. So
trying to
sometimes there's pressure that way.
As possible.
Yeah. And the example I can think of is we need fans in here immediately, right? Like fans can't wait at the gates. And from an event and security perspective, it's like there's a lot that's going on in the world, and I trust my security team to search properly and do what they have to do to, yes, be efficient. Like, let's find ways for them to be more efficient to get fans in, but let's make sure that the process is thorough so we aren't in a situation where someone got into the building with something that they shouldn't have, right? So that's an example there. Sometimes there are those kind of like internal administrative pressures to, why is this done this way? I want so-and-so to have access to this. And it's like, well, if they have access to this level, then they have access to all, like, complete back of house. And, so it kind of spirals sometimes.
Yeah, there's different tiers of the credential access.
Yes.
Depending on, obviously, football and basketball, the bigger events, you have that. But yeah, and you have to decide from your perspective is which credential type gets access. Yeah, it's for some of it's either you get it all or you just have a little bit.
Yes, and then giving it all to certain, you know what I mean, and then it just spirals into there, and people are in places they shouldn't be, or then it gets very gray of, okay, well, you gave this person access to this, why can't so and so? So I definitely see that element of a pressure from an internal piece, and then externally, to your point of being on TV and conferences or watching and stuff like that. I think that pressure is a sense of knowing your policies and procedures, like through and through, and policies and procedures of what you implement as an institution, but also what the policies and procedures are from a conference as well. So a really good example this year is we had a drone fly over our football stadium. And the current policy, which I think is pretty nationwide, is drones should not be approved, especially when an event is going on. Shouldn't be flying over people could fall, and there's a lot of liability and a lot of issues there. We are fortunate we do have drone technology. So when a drone comes into our vicinity, we're able to kind of track that, see it coming. And then we are also able to identify where the operator is. So for this instinct, we were not able to find where the operator is. We just saw the drone kind of hovering over the stadium, didn't know who it was. Typically, we know where the operator is. We'll call CHP, they go respond. We have eyes on it. We know what's going on if we need to escalate, but it's at least being handled and the game is still kind of going on. This one, I don't know if our technology was off, something was weird. So we weren't able to figure out where the operator was, and we were almost got in a situation where we needed to postpone the game and evacuate the field, because that is the policy from a safety perspective. luckily the drone eventually left when we were, but we did kind of go into a minor pause right before but we're able to go into a break. So that was kind of an intense kind of pressure, but we knew our policies. We were able to communicate effectively with the officials. We kind of got lucky with the commercial break. And I think the official kind of saying that there's a drone kind of deterred the drone, like, okay, I got kind of caught, and we're able to handle the situation there. But there is kind of pressures of everything going right. But when things don't go right, knowing those policies and procedures, and then also the communication plan of who you need to communicate to, when, why, and what's the next steps of how to handle something is kind of like your best thing in your pocket for situations like that.
When we talk about lines of communication, how do you guys establish that? Is that in your internal meetings before the game, before the season? How do you guys determine that model?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is built before the season, and it's also very situational too. So establishing what those situations are and who needs to be looped in on what. But then we also do very thorough briefings day of the event of, if this happens, this is our policies and procedures. Ironically, the day with the drone, it was during the 90-minute meeting, which is includes the internal game management staff that's on the field, like point of contacts. The officials are on site, and then the director of ops for football, so they represent both teams, and any others necessary for that. I know police are in that meetings and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
And ironically, our event staff that runs those meetings says, hey, this is our drone policy, but I don't think we've never had this issue. It will never happen.
And then it happened.
And it happened. But the good part is he addressed it. This is what happens. This is our policies and procedures. And it's quick. It's just like, hey, if a drone happens, we're going to let you know. If the status is, we'll evacuate. And then if it lands, we're evacuating, certain people at this point. And it's just a quick hit. But then if you have bigger stuff of lightning, our lightning policies, and if we have to go into a delay for that, what is our communication line? All of that is also pre-established of, letting TV know, the conference know, and then at what miles lightning is about 15 miles away. We're not delaying the game, but we're going to notify X, Y, and Z that, hey, lightning is closer to the area. If it gets to 8 or 6 miles, I know it kind of differs for different stadiums. This is our evacuation policy. So just creating that buffer too of if situations could potentially be coming, that you've built in that early communication piece before it arrives, if you can. Sometimes you can't.
Yeah, for sure. And football is totally different. So for the students, for every football game, the 90-minute meeting occurs about 90 minutes prior to the game. As Jordan touched on, you have the event staff and officials and everyone who's in both teams, everyone who's involved. But you don't do that for smaller events, So when talking about if you're working a soccer game and there's lightning in the area, it's communicating as soon as you see the teams arriving to the stadium and say, hey, this is the situation, communicating with officials pregame. It's not as organized as it is for a football game, but it's always having that communication as much as possible is huge. I mean, I'm sure you can speak on that too, but just communication during these events is probably one of the most important things out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we noticed that we don't do that for our smaller sports. So we actually started implementing that okay, we're going to start having our 90-minute meetings out and it's smaller base. So for the soccer and lacrosse, it is just the athletic trainers and the event manager or the director of ops, if they want to come into it too. For all of our arena sports, we do it now as well. So that's our men's, women's basketball. We have men's and women's basketball, men's and women's volleyball at USC. So we have a briefing. It's we do it 65 minutes out, but it's just quick rundown of what the event is, if we have giveaways and X, Y, and Z. And then if we've had any issues like fan code of conduct or stuff like that, like in the past couple events, what that looked like. But they're quick little 5 to 10 minute meetings. So that's something I know USC has kind of done, because we realize that communication piece has been key for us.
Oh, that's big time. I think
Yeah.
it's something a lot of other schools, I'm sure are seeing based on how things have changed post-pandemic. And it feels like fans are very excited to be back.
Yeah.
In very overly excited.
Yes.
Which is great. It creates a better atmosphere and experience for fans, but can also have a little more problems for us who are working.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
For sure. How does conference realignment affect you? I know right now you guys are going to be going to your final season in the Pac-12 before the Big Ten. Can you talk about some of the things you guys are prepping for, or have those discussions not really happened yet?
Yeah, so we actually just went to a Big Ten meeting, like event management meeting last week. My team went. I joined via Zoom, stayed in LA, but that was kind of nice for them to kind of send that invite out to us, so we were able to kind of hear in on some of the conference like event rules and policies that they have that may differ from the Pac-12. I think from an event perspective, there's definitely a lot of stuff that I think we're already doing that they're looking to like implement. So for an example, I think like pitch clocks is new from a baseball perspective, and we've had it for 4 years. So like so that stuff's been kind of good. I don't think there's anything that we need to fully, adjust. I think just the biggest thing is probably like football and basketball. And then also basketball on a whole nother level for us is it's gearing up, so which is good. So we're already kind of adjusting based on who's coming in for us next year.
The who.
Yes, Bronny James is coming, so we're gearing up for that, which will be good. But I think the biggest thing for us now is just like from a facility standpoint, being compliant that way. So, everything that has Pac-12 has to go. And everything new that says Big Ten has to come in. But it's not always a straight swap. I think the biggest thing is our court flooring. And where Pac-12 has their logos is very different from where Big Ten has theirs.
Oh, really?
So that's like a pretty significant, take on. So I think from a facility aspect, being compliant with what their requirements and stuff are. And then I think another piece is the TV piece. So that's probably the biggest thing. We've had a couple of meetings of them coming out and checking out all of our facilities and the infrastructure there. And kind of learning our facility, whereas Pac-12 network has they're dialed in. They know where everything is. It's just coordinating access for them, right? So I think that will be kind of a little bit of a learning moment of how the Big Ten network operates, what their full needs are, and then learning our facilities and stuff like that. So I think that's probably the biggest thing as of now from us from a game management perspective. And then just kind of learning what's required and not required and stuff from an event perspective of, that can be easily of like feeding officials, right? Like just little nuances of each sport and what their kind of requirement and what they voted on and stuff like that. But
yeah, I guess from a networking side of things, like you're having, because every conference they have a deal with a certain TV provider, whether it's ESPN, Fox, CBS, they all have, it's the same, still a broadcast, but they all have different ways of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think that probably touches more on the facility side of things. The realignment's probably a big upheaval of what you've had, or like sometimes you get new branding 2 years ago, and then all of a sudden, you're leaving, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Having been a part of like some like minor conference realignment for minor sports, but it's still something where like you have to cover up old logos. Use the example that Wagner men's lacrosse was moving from the NEC to the MAAC. And so it's trying to figure out signage, and when you're broadcasting it, you can't have anything and the other conferences logos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's a fun one. So you've worked a handful of championships, both NCAA and conference. Can you touch on what your experience is like working with the conference to host, as well as working with the NCAA?
Yeah, so the two biggest ones that I have personally have done, I've kind of co-helped with a few, which has been great. Great experience and kind of exposure. But so I oversee track and field. My first year coming in at USC was COVID year. So I graciously had a better full year to kind of like plan this and kind of like if it was happening, if it wasn't happening.
Yeah, but you started in like March?
Yes, March 2nd.
Yes.
2 weeks before everything shut down.
I remember we were discussing, well, Jordan just started, now stuck at home.
Yeah, no, it was great. But no, definitely a blessing in disguise with this championship. But track and field was one of them. And that was my first, like, okay, this is your championship, you run it. And so that was a pretty significant kind of learning curve, just because of the expectations from a conference standpoint is very different, than a normal meet that you would host from. And a lot of it has to do with signage and branding. They're huge on that. And then the network and stuff like that. It is a lot, which is great. Like in the goal is to make it neutral too, right? Like you're hosting not as USC, but hosting as the conference or as the NC2A. So you're trying to make it as neutral as possible. So definitely understand that element of it. But when that's like such a heavy focus compared to like actually running the event, it becomes a lot. So that was a great experience, 3-day tournament. And then luckily, because it was COVID, we said there was no fans, just nixed it. So that was also very helpful in that.
That was for Pac-12 championship. Okay.
Pac-12. And then we also hosted Pac-12 championships for cross country this past year, which also was a significant learning curve because we do not host cross country meets. We have no place for them.
Kind of hard to host in the middle of Los Angeles.
Exactly. So we went to UC Riverside. We hosted a day before their conference championship. So it kind of like worked well. We're able to share resources and stuff like that. And then I also was able to kind of lean heavily on Riverside on the course and very cross-country specific stuff, because I've never ran a cross-country event. So that knowledge, just to be transparent, isn't there. So I can help run the event and know the nuances of what needs to happen. But cross-country specific was not my strong suit. So
I think if I remember correctly, Riverside, like I went because we were planning to host cross-country championships at Davis the following year. And they were basically the host all the time because location, and they just had a very specific course.
No, they have it like dialed in. So it was very much a blessing to be over there and host over there. And then but yeah, I think also the kind of the biggest thing, I personally haven't hosted an NC2A championship with any of my sports, but have had to be ready to and put in the bid process. And that is always a huge kind of undertaking of putting in the bid for that opportunity for your team to host if they get granted that opportunity. So it is one of those, be ready, you're waiting on selection Sunday or selection Monday with those teams. To see if you are hosting, to then like execute immediately. You're having your your team manuals and stuff ready to go, visiting team information guides ready to go, prepped. So then once you have those names, you're sending those out. And now that I think about it, I actually did do tennis, but I had to cover my boss was on maternity leave, so I kind of forgot that I did that. But yes, you're you have to be prepared and have everyone just ready to, like, almost like on speed dial. As soon as you know where you're hosting, you're sending out all of that information that Sunday night, because it's most likely Sunday, and that first game is like on a Wednesday, and you have practices Tuesday. Like, it's a very small window.
You talk about the bid process. So your teams are, a lot of times it's like best, you have a better record, so you're going to host, but that's not always the case with every sport.
Yeah, so it gets tricky, and my recommendation. So the bids come out pretty early in the season. I would say like midway of the season, and it can be challenging to tell if you're going to be in a position to host, or even be in a position to be in the NC2A tournament. So for us, what we do is we send out communications as soon as that, like within a week or so that bid is going to be open. We send communications out to the team and their sports administrator, and we ask them, would you like us to put in this bid? I'd say about 90% of the time, they'll always say yes, because they just want to have that in that opportunity. Sometimes it could be like, no, like there's no chance or anything. But we leave that up to the coach to make that decision, because you don't want to be in the position to where you personally didn't put in a bid because you didn't think, and then for some reason, somehow there was
an have a great season. And
so that bid process kind of looks like essentially of just, you're basically stating what it's a lot more facility based, of like, the capacity of your facility. Does your facility have lights, right? So could you host a night game or not? Does the lights at a certain standard where TV can come in and it's appropriate for TV? What does ticketing look like? What would you charge for tickets? What would that look like? And then you're also building out your expenses and revenue. They want to kind of see that, to see that it ultimately will try to break even. It will never break even. You will always lose money, but you're ultimately trying to get to that $0 amount. Then I would say the next biggest thing is you're also looking to secure hotels, especially from an NC2A perspective. Conference championships, it depends on the sport, but typically you don't have to secure hotels. You just send a list. Hey, here's our preferred hotel list for the teams to secure. They may ask you to secure for like officials or conference staff and stuff like that, but they would handle payment. But for NC2As, you do have to secure a block of hotels for those teams, officials, and NC2A staff that may be coming in for that tournament. So that's pretty huge, and especially being in LA, that's definitely a challenge, because also the NC2A asks for the hotels to be within a certain amount, and it is not LA friendly amount.
Where everything is at least an hour drive.
Exactly. Yeah. And then everything has to be within 30 miles too. So there's parameters there. And then hotels, we build these relationships with these hotels, but they're kind of like, not wanting to block off a significant amount of rooms, and there's no guarantee we would use them. So they're also gambling there with us too. But all of that is part of the bid process. You'll submit the bid. NC2A will review. And then ultimately, if you're at a higher rank, and if they're okay with the parameters that you've set place for your facility and what we're able to accommodate, they would give you the bid.
That's very cool. What's your long-term goal working in this industry? Where does Jordan Grays want to be in 10 years?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I will be transparent. I think I will pivot.
Okay.
I think I don't know to what, but 10 years. I think I'm pivoting.
Okay.
I'm pivoting. Yes. I enjoy game management and event management and facilities. It is a lot of hard work, a lot of hours, a lot of stuff behind the scenes and unappreciated work and stuff like that. But I think you find great people in the industry that support you, that are there for you. So you ultimately do it for those people. But yeah, I think I want to challenge myself.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And event management is not specific to sports. There's other events out there like concerts and rodeos is one thing that comes to mind, funny enough.
Exactly. Yeah. But I always tell people who don't know what they want to do and they're just in the sport industry is to get into events and event management because we touch every aspect of everything. So I love seeing like our interns and our GAs and they're helping us out with certain stuff, but then we need them helping with development and they get to connect with people in development and they're like, oh, this is actually what I want to do. I absolutely love that because we literally are the glue for the entire department and every entity around it. So we're exposed to so much. So to anyone who hears me like, oh, she wants to leave, or pivot, like it is an amazing place to start your career and then able to kind of find out. And then you also build so many skills and assets. And it's just like, I have no fear of changing a career path because I feel so confident in the skill set that I built for what I've been doing for so long. So, but yeah.
All right. Just to wrap this up, you kind of touched on a little bit, but what's a piece of advice that you have for a student looking to get into this side of the industry?
Yeah, my piece of advice is to, I think I say this like all around, but my favorite quote from a book is The Outsiders is stay gold. To me, that's just stay true to who you are. And I think there's times where it's just like long days and long hours and it, sometimes feels like it's taking a lot out of you but to like take a step back and stay true to who you are, to stay true to your why, like why you're choosing to do this, why this path makes you happy or what that is. I would always go back to what's your why and to stay true to who you are and true to why you've made that decision. And if it feels different, then it feels different and that you can explore other ways, but staying true to who you are and why you kind of fell in love or are falling in love with this part of the industry, I think is critical to hold key, like to your heart.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And for those of you who haven't read The Outsiders, is that the one where they can't see color? Or am I thinking of a different book?
No, I think you're a different one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bad tangent.
It's okay. It's okay.
Jordan, thank you very much for taking the time. Really do appreciate it. And keep up all the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate the conversation. Hopefully it was helpful. So thank you.
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Okay.